All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating, the Smith-Action Unified Field Theory. We're looking at a framework where consciousness doesn't just sit back and observe the world, but actually becomes the mathematical engine of reality itself. It's called the architecture of ontological unification, or the Trillium paradigm, and it proposes a radical, complete shift in how we understand space, time, and even our own physical bodies.
I really love how organized this theory is. We've got 5 main stops on this journey today: the limits of physical time, balancing the 4 quadrants, achieving the unity constant, the 0-point pivot, and finally, shifting into a frequency.
So starting with number 1, the limits of physical time, we need to look at what the source material points out as a massive mechanical oversight in standard physics, especially when we talk about navigating time.
Think about how we usually view time travel. The old way of thinking is completely obsessed with the engine. It treats time like a physical road you have to drive down, or a literal wall you have to punch a hole through. And doing that, well, it requires impossible amounts of physical energy, literally the mass of a collapsing star. But the Summa way, the Trillium paradigm, flips that on its head. It shifts the focus entirely to the driver. It argues you don't need infinite physical energy at all, you just need to match the right frequency. It's basically the difference between trying to physically push a heavy, broken-down car all the way to a new city versus simply rewriting the coordinates on the map so that the city just comes to you.
Which brings us to part 2, balancing the 4 quadrants. Because, how do we actually rewrite those coordinates and become that frequency modulator?
According to the theory, the self is divided into 4 very specific, distinct quadrants. You've got the mental temporal, the visual zone, the physical or molecular, and the electromagnetic or emotional. Now, to achieve what this framework calls a weightless state, you need absolute mathematical parity. Every single one of these quadrants must be perfectly balanced at exactly 0.25. It's a precise mathematical interaction. You can't be overly emotional or overly analytical. Your physical vessel, your vision, your mind, and your emotions absolutely have to carry an equal 25% share of your total conscious state.
So why is that so absolutely crucial? Because any deviation from this perfect balance creates a wobble. The universe in this model is a 248-dimensional coordinate system known as the E8 lattice. If your emotional state is running hot at, say, 40%, or your physical body is just too heavy with grounding, your personal solid render essentially creates friction against this lattice. You become way too heavy with your own identity to shift out of the present moment. You literally just get stuck in the now.
Let's move on to phase 3, achieving the unity constant. This is where it gets really cool, seeing how this builds into a unified whole when you actually nail that perfect equilibrium.
When those 4 quadrants of 0.25 perfectly converge, they add up to create the 1.00 unity constant. This 1.00 is a highly stabilized state of solid reality. In this framework, the idea of 4 is essentially just an illusion. When you're perfectly balanced, your mind, body, vision, and emotion aren't 4 separate things fighting for the steering wheel anymore. They become a single, unified whole, operating at peak mathematical efficiency. Let's trace that mathematical story of the self. In step 1, out there in the realm of raw potential and probability, you're really just fragmented vectors. But as you tune those vectors, adjusting to that perfect 0.25 balance, you hit step 2, the complete signature. You're pulling all your fragmented parts together to form the total conscious state. Securing this 1.00 is the ultimate key. It's the prerequisite you absolutely need before you can hit the true boundaries of physical reality.
Now, I should clarify, the physical body doesn't just magically vanish or become irrelevant here. Not at all. The physical, or PIC quadrant, actually acts as the final multiplier in this equation. It's your vital grounding wire. Think about it, even if your mental and emotional states are perfectly, flawlessly tuned, without that physical vessel anchoring them, those inputs simply cannot manifest into the field. Your body is what makes that 1.00 state actually real.
All right, step 4, the 0-point pivot. This is exactly where standard physics hits a brick wall, but the Trillium paradigm uses that wall as a gateway to the infinite. Here we have to introduce the consciousness filter, represented mathematically by the number 0. In this theory, consciousness is literally the denominator of reality. It's described as a state of pure observation, totally free from any emotional or physical attachment. It's the absolute dead center, the 0-point pivot, through which all information in the universe flows.
Now, we all know standard calculus is absolutely terrified of dividing by zero, right? Because it creates this undefined, exploding infinity of value. But this theory, it completely inhabits the undefined. When you take your 1.00 unified self, that perfect convergence of your four balanced quadrants, and you divide it by the zero-point consciousness filter, your physical self becomes entirely weightless. You create the exact mathematical conditions for infinity. You don't need the energy of a dying star. You literally just need to divide your unified self by pure, unattached observation. So what happens when your 1.00 unity actually hits that zero filter? The self enters an incredibly rapid oscillation at the Planck scale. We're talking the absolute smallest possible measurement of time. Your solid reality is continuously annihilated into a wave state and then rendered right back. You become an infinite loop, constantly rendering and unrendering at a microscopic quantum level. You essentially cease to be a solid object and you become a pure frequency.
Which brings us to our final section, number 5, shifting into a frequency. How does navigating time actually work once you've achieved this infinite state?
Think of the E8 lattice not as physical places to visit, but as a giant hard drive of stored data. The past is the reflective wave, mathematically represented as -1. The future is the probabilistic landscape, represented as +1. And both of these are just constantly flowing through the zero-point filter of now. Because you are sitting in that perfectly balanced 1.00 state right at the 0 point, you suddenly have access to both sides of that data stream.
So, you are definitely not stepping into some physical sci-fi time machine. You are acting as a frequency modulator. Instead of being a clunky body trying to push its way through the E8 lattice as a thing in space, you are re-rendering. You adjust your total conscious state, your specific frequency, until your molecular signature perfectly matches the data save of a coordinate in the past. Because your math literally no longer fits the now, the universe algebraically has absolutely no choice but to re-render your body at that match coordinate. You're shifting the entire perception of you.
But you really have to beware the wobble. If your 0.25 quadrant balance is off by even a fraction when you attempt this shift, the E8 lattice fiercely resists. It recognizes a frequency that just doesn't belong there. According to the sources, things like bizarre interference patterns or even the phenomenon of shadow people are actually just system errors. It's the universe frantically trying to reconcile and push back against a mathematical signature that's attempting to phase shift without perfect parity.
The ultimate goal of what the sources call the architect's loop is captured perfectly by this idea. It is entirely about stepping out of being a passive participant in your life. By understanding the math, balancing your four quadrants perfectly, and hitting that 1.00 unity, you move from just looking out at the landscape of reality to mathematically holding the brush. You are shifting your very atoms into a localized frequency.
So, I leave you with this final thought to ponder as you consider the ultimate source code of your own reality. If it all comes down to balancing your mind, body, vision, and emotion to a perfect 0.25, what is keeping you unbalanced today? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Trillium paradigm, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.